The fall of the Golden Child Thanksgiving was always an uncomfortable ritual in my family, but that year it transformed into something much worse. My name is Aaron, and I'm 31 now. For most of my adult life, I've preferred to fly under the radar. I was the quiet son, the one who was always willing to help, the one who never asked for anything. My place was in the shadows, doing what needed to be done. Maybe that was my mistake. When people get used to you being invisible, they start to think you don't exist. My brother, Luke, was the favorite. A high school football star, a scholarship student in college, a business graduate. He had it all and always got the applause. My parents, especially my mother, would light up when he walked into a room. "That's my boy," she'd swell with pride, as if announcing royalty. I, on the other hand, was simply Aaron. My grades were decent, I lived my life, and I got a job after college, slowly building a stable life without major luxuries. But none of that seemed to matter. The irony was that I was the one discreetly keeping everything afloat. My father had a health issue 5 years ago and had to reduce his work hours. The bills, of course, didn't stop. So I took the reins, covering the mortgage, utilities, and part of the medical expenses. It wasn't meant to be a permanent thing, just a simple gesture of support among family. Or so I thought. But the more I helped, the less they noticed. Or maybe they did notice, and just assumed it was my duty. Luke never put in a single cent. He would show up at parties in a new suit or talking about the latest conference he had traveled to, be it in Dubai or Toronto. My mother would listen to him spellbound, as if he were a corporate messiah. My father would just nod, drinking his whiskey, not saying much. And me, well, I was usually in the kitchen, checking the oven, taking out dishes, helping to clear up. That Thanksgiving started as usual. I arrived early to help my mother prepare the meal, even though she barely acknowledged me. "The potatoes need mashing," she said by way of a greeting. No hugs, no smiles, just orders. I nodded, as always, and got to work. An hour later, Luke arrived with a bottle of wine and his new girlfriend, Danielle, who barely looked old enough to drink. Everyone greeted her with exclamations of admiration, while I set the table, ignored in plain sight. Dinner was the same old song and dance. My mother bragging about Luke's latest successes, and him acting as if he had invented the concept of work. Danielle would laugh loudly and forcefully at his jokes. I sat there, cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, chewing slowly, in silence, until the conversation took a turn. It started innocently enough. My mother mentioned how nice it must be to live alone, hinting that my life was easy. I made a joke, something like, "Yeah, the mortgage fairy helps me with that," trying to play it down. But then she gave me a sharp, cold look. "You know, Aaron, you've always acted like you're doing us a huge favor. You're not. You've always been a burden." The table went silent for a moment. I blinked, thinking I hadn't heard her right. But before I could say anything, Luke laughed, shook his head, and added, "At least I make this family proud." There it was. That phrase. A direct punch to the gut. The way he said it, so casually, as if it were an undeniable fact that I should already know. Something inside me just stopped completely. I put down my fork, leaned back, and stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I didn't even look at them. I just walked out, grabbed my coat, got in my car, and drove home. The drive back was strangely silent. I didn't even turn on the radio. My phone vibrated once or twice, probably with messages from my mother asking where I had gone or from Danielle trying to smooth things over. I didn't look at them. I drove in silence, parked, went inside, and sat on the sofa for a long time, thinking. I thought about every bill I had paid, every silent sacrifice, every time I had been there when they needed me, trips, groceries, last-minute repairs. I thought about how not once had they ever said thank you. Not once had anyone said, "We value you." Instead, they called me a burden, right after I had peeled potatoes for 3 hours and paid their mortgage again. For a while, I didn't know what to do. I was furious, of course, but more than anything, I felt empty. As if I had just understood something I should have known a long time ago. They didn't see me as part of the family. They saw me as a tool, a resource, a walking wallet. So I stopped cold. No more payments. No more silent help. No more being the family doormat. I didn't send a message. I didn't give an explanation. I just let everything go. I canceled the automatic payment. I deleted the bill reminders from my calendar and went on with my life. Weeks passed. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dad. He never called me. Even as a child, he let my mother handle everything. So when I saw his name, I hesitated but answered. "Hello, Dad," I said. His voice sounded tense, annoyed. "Aaron," he said, "why hasn't the mortgage been paid?" I didn't think for a second. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Ask your pride and joy." And I hung up. That's when everything began to fall apart. After that call, the silence was deafening. No one contacted me. Not my mother. Not Luke. Not even with a lukewarm, "Are you okay?" It was as if they were waiting for me to crawl back as soon as the consequences hit them. As if my absence was just a tantrum, something temporary. They still didn't get it, but they would. 2 days after Dad's call, I got a message from my mother. No greeting, no context. Just, "We need you to take care of the mortgage before it affects our credit. Don't be immature." Immature. That was the word she chose. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "Let's talk." Just a cold, cutting command. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over it. I could have said a lot. I could have let the years of resentment flow into a long message, but I didn't. I left it on read and put my phone away. If they wanted to pretend I was just a cog in their machine, fine. Let's see how they worked without me. The disaster took longer than I expected, but it came. I started hearing about things through my distant family, especially my cousin Rachel, who lived near my parents. She called me one night with a nervous laugh. Just, "So you know, your mom has been telling people you're going through something, that you haven't been well lately." A chill ran down my spine. "I'm not well," I repeated. "Yeah," she said carefully. "Mental health stuff. She says you're having some kind of breakdown. That you're unstable. That you're lashing out at people." I, obviously, didn't believe her. "But she's building a story like you're out of control." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. There it was. The classic distortion. Instead of facing the truth, they were rewriting it, framing me as the problem, making it seem like I had just exploded, that I was unstable. It was easier than admitting they had abused my goodwill for too long and had finally broken the only person holding the family up. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it hurt. What really got to me was how they handled Christmas. It had always been held at my house for the last few years, mainly because I had the space and the patience. I would decorate, cook the dinner, buy thoughtful gifts. Even when money was tight, I made it feel special. But that year, I didn't invite them. I didn't say anything. I figured they would get the message. Instead, they held their own get-together without telling me and uploaded a bunch of smiling photos to Facebook. Luke beaming next to my mother, Danielle with a wine glass next to the tree I had bought the year before. The caption read, "Thankful for family. Some people may leave, but the ones that matter always stick together." It hurt more than I expected. At first, I didn't even feel anger, just an emptiness, as if they had finally excised me completely. They didn't miss me. They had simply patched over the hole I left and moved on. But the cracks didn't take long to show. Rachel called again in mid-January. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Luke is in trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" "He quit his job. He says he's starting something on his own. A consulting business or something, but the rumor is he was fired. Misused company funds or something shady. No one's telling the full story." That took me by surprise. Luke had always been the golden child, but not exactly the most responsible. He loved appearances, fancy cars, expensive watches, designer suits. For years I had silently wondered how he afforded that lifestyle without the consequences catching up to him. Now, it seemed, he had finally paid the piper. I didn't say anything to Rachel at the time, but in the back of my mind, a quiet thought stirred. They're going to come looking for me again. And they did. It started with a long message from my mother. Unusually sweet, almost theatrical. "Hi, honey, I know things have been tense, but family is forever. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner soon. I'll make that roast you love." I didn't reply. 2 days later, another message came. This one was from Dad. Again, to the point. "We're going through a tough time. The mortgage is 2 months behind. Your mother is very upset. Can you help us, please? Just this once." I stared at the screen and laughed. Just this once. I had been helping silently for years, without a thank you, without recognition. And now, after calling me a burden and treating me like a disgrace, they wanted me to step in again, just this once. What hit me most was how little they seemed to understand what they had done. To them, I was still the second option, the quiet guy, the helper. They didn't realize my silence wasn't temporary, that I wasn't coming back. But they kept pushing. Luke called one night. I didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. I listened to it once, then again, just to make sure I had heard what I thought I had. Hey, Aaron, look. I know things got out of hand, but you've always been good with money, and I've got a business idea that could really work. I just need some seed money. I thought maybe you'd want in on the ground floor, as an investment. We'd both win, you know. I was in stunned silence. It wasn't even an apology. It wasn't a real apology, just a sales pitch. As if I were a venture capitalist and not his brother. As if he hadn't laughed in my face on Thanksgiving while I silently propped up their parents' financial stability. Something in me shifted after that call. I had been quiet, but it wasn't just about hurt anymore. It was about clarity. I saw them now for what they were, and more importantly, for what I wasn't to them. I wasn't family. I was a resource. And the moment I stopped being useful, they rewrote the story to make me the bad guy. But now, I wasn't just fed up. I was done with being nice. And that's when I started to hatch my plan. I didn't rush. I'm not a dramatic person. I've never been one to shout or make a scene to show others my worth. No, I preferred quiet exits, silent steps, and letting the silence speak for itself. But when someone tries to turn you into a villain just because you stopped bleeding for them, it hits something deeper. You realize that silence alone won't be enough. Not this time. The betrayal that changed everything came a week after Luke's voicemail. I was at work, sitting at my desk, going over some reports, when I got a call from an unknown number. I was about to let it ring, but something told me to answer. Aaron Miller, the voice asked, polite but firm. This is me. We're calling from Lakeshore Lending. We're following up on your recent mortgage application. I froze. Excuse me? What application? The man paused. I heard the rustle of papers. It's for the application filed on January 11th for a new loan on 324 Linton Avenue. That's your address, correct? Slowly, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the air thicken around me. That was my address. My house. Hold on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't file an application. More silence. Then the man asked carefully, You didn't authorize Luke Miller as a co-signer on this application? My stomach dropped. No, I did not. I asked him to send me the documentation. He agreed. I hung up and just sat there, stunned, staring at my desk without blinking. 10 minutes later, the email hit my inbox. Attached was a scanned PDF. I opened it and saw my name and information all over it, along with Luke's forged signature, a falsified income statement. He had even included my banking information. Accounts I hadn't shared with anyone in years. And most insulting of all, under the intended use of funds section, the box for capital for a family business was checked. Was enraged. He didn't just try to leverage my goodwill. He tried to steal from me. He tried to use my house to finance a doomed idea. The same house I had worked overtime to afford. The same house whose existence they conveniently forgot when they called me a burden. It was as if the years of being ignored, dismissed, and manipulated all came crashing down in that moment. As if every time I had let something slide, every time I had swallowed my pride and done what they needed, it had led me to this betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there still. The feeling you get after a car accident, when your body is fine but your brain hasn't quite caught up. Slowly, I opened a new browser tab. I started with an email to my lawyer, a woman named Marissa, whom I had hired a couple of years back for a work issue. I wasn't sure if she'd take a personal case, but I told her everything. The forged documents, the banking info, the unauthorized loan application. I sent her the PDF. I attached screenshots. I included Luke's voicemail. Within 20 minutes, she replied. I can help. Step 1 is to lock down your credit. Step 2, report this to the authorities. Step 3, decide how loud you want to be. That last sentence stuck with me. How loud do I want to be? I had spent my entire life being silent, avoiding conflict, choosing peace over confrontation. But they had gone too far now. Luke had tried to put me into debt without asking. My parents had painted me as an unstable person to cover for their own negligence. And when I stopped giving, they didn't ask why. They simply demanded more. No, this time I would be loud. Undeniable. I didn't answer anyone that weekend. I didn't take messages or calls. I spent the entire time going through old receipts, bank records, and emails. I built a timeline. Every payment I had made for my parents, every mortgage deposit, every expense I had covered. I tagged them, dated them, and organized them into an immaculate folder. I wanted proof so clean it would cut glass. Monday morning, I filed a police report for attempted identity theft and fraud. I gave everything to Marissa, who drafted a cease and desist order for Luke, legally prohibiting him from using or accessing any of my financial records or personal information. She also added a clause to protect my home from any future activity without my written consent. And for good measure, I froze all my credit accounts, changed all my passwords, and set up two-factor authentication on everything. Luke was not going to get near anything that was mine again. 3 days later, Luke called. This time, I answered. "Aaron," he said, as if we were old friends. "Hey, listen. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Save it." He stopped. "What?" "I know what you did. I have the documents. The bank called me directly. I've already filed the police report and you'll be hearing from my lawyer." There was a pause, and then a nervous laugh. "Dude, come on. It wasn't like that. I needed a little help, man. I thought we'd both benefit. It's not like I was going to screw you over or anything." "You already did," I said flatly. "You just didn't expect to get caught." "Okay, look," he said, his tone shifting quickly. "Let's be real for a second. You've always had a leg up. You live alone. No kids, no real responsibilities. You can afford to float some cash. I'm out here trying to build something. You're just sitting around doing nothing. Why don't you do something that actually matters for once?" In that moment, I realized he truly believed it. He wasn't just a manipulator. He genuinely thought he was entitled to my life, my money, my home, because in his mind, he mattered more. I was just the quiet guy, the background character, the fallback plan. I hung up without another word. That's when the real fall began. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had lived in years. Not because of what Luke had done. I had already protected everything. I wasn't at risk of losing my house and my finances were safe. No, the real weight came from something deeper, something colder. I hadn't realized how much I still wanted to believe my family would react. That maybe, after all of it, they would see what they had done. Maybe they would apologize. Maybe I would hear my father say something, anything, about how wrong it all was. But the silence told me everything I needed to know. No one called to ask what had really happened. No one apologized for what Luke had done. Instead, they dug in their heels. Rachel called again, her voice tense and low, as if she didn't want to be overheard. "Aaron, just so you know, your mom is telling everyone you're trying to get Luke put in jail. She said you're making it up to get back at the family." I didn't even respond. I just stood in my living room with the phone in my hand, staring out the window. It was a gray, cloudy day, one of those afternoons where the world seemed to hold its breath. But inside, something had completely deflated in me. They weren't just excusing Luke. They were painting me as the villain again because it was easier than admitting they had failed me. Easier than admitting they had leaned on me like a crutch for years, and then kicked me when I stopped walking for them. I started skipping meals, not on purpose. I would just lose track of time, and then realize it was 10 p.m. and I hadn't eaten all day. My sleep became irregular. Some nights I would just lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time I had smiled through the pain just to keep the peace. The moment that broke me wasn't a dramatic one. It was a Wednesday morning. I opened the refrigerator, saw a half-empty carton of eggs and stale bread, and realized I just didn't have the energy to make anything. So I sat down on the kitchen floor, leaned my back against the cabinet, and just stared into nothing for nearly an hour. That was my low point. My quiet rock bottom, no crying, no screaming, just empty. In that moment, I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want closure. I just wanted to stop caring. I wanted to erase the need for their approval, to finally accept that it was never coming, that nothing I did would ever be enough for them because they never really wanted me to succeed. They just wanted me to stay in my place, useful, invisible, silent. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove to the lake. There's a cabin there, small, hidden among tall pines, with a crooked dock that creaks when you walk on it. It used to be my grandfather's. He left it to me when he passed, probably because I was the only one who ever visited. I hadn't been there in almost 2 years. There's no cell service, no noise, just the wind and the water and the sound of birds scuttling through the trees. I stayed for 3 days, not telling anyone, not bringing my laptop, just a notepad, some books, and a thermos full of coffee. I sat by the water, walked the trails, let my mind go quiet, and slowly, without even trying, the plan started to form. It wasn't about revenge, but about liberation. I had held onto the idea of family for so long. As if I just proved enough, they would see me, love me, be proud. But that version of family didn't exist, at least not with them. And so I started to think about how to leave, not out of spite, but out of necessity. When I got home, I started making changes. First, I took my name off of everything related to my parents. No more emergency contact, no more shared financial accounts, nothing that could tie me to them. I contacted the bank and made sure they flagged any future attempts at joint applications or inquiries under my name. I also gave Marissa, my lawyer, power to act on my behalf in any related matters. She was more than willing to help, especially now that things were escalating. Then, discreetly, I started looking for job transfers. My company had out-of-state branches, one in Oregon, one in Colorado. I didn't tell anyone yet. I just wanted to see what it would be like to start from scratch. To live somewhere where no one knew me as the disappointing son or the background brother. I wasn't in a hurry. I wasn't going to make a grand announcement. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something for myself. As I took steps to leave them behind, I knew I couldn't end it like this. Not entirely. Not without the truth coming out. Because they were still out there telling people I was unstable. That I was the problem. That I had abandoned my poor, needy family after everything they had done for me. And that lie, I couldn't let them keep. So I waited. I kept quiet. But behind the scenes, I was preparing the final move. Because there would come a time when they would cross the line again. When they did, I would be ready. It wasn't overnight. But slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild my life. Only this time, I was building it under my own rules. No guilt, no obligation, just quiet, deliberate decisions made by me and no one else. The first real change came at work. I had been in the same role for 5 years, a project analyst for a logistics company. I liked it, but I had never aspired to more. I always kept my head down. I always took the extra assignments without complaining, just like at home. But after everything that had happened, something clicked in me. I stopped waiting for someone to notice my work and started speaking up. I pitched a new customer retention model during a team meeting, something I had been working on in my spare time for months. Our regional manager loved it. Within weeks, I was presenting it to the executive team. A month later, I was offered a position at their new Portland, Oregon office, with a title promotion, a pay raise, and best of all, a relocation package. I didn't accept right away. Not because I wasn't interested. I was. But I needed to know I was doing it for the right reason. I spent a weekend walking around my apartment, touching every drawer, every picture frame, every silent reminder of who I used to be. The son who paid and stayed, waiting for a sliver of appreciation that never came. And by Sunday night, I opened my laptop, drafted the acceptance email, and sent it. Just like that, I had a fresh start. I sold my house in 3 weeks. It went for over the asking price. The market was hot, and I had taken better care of it than most people. I didn't tell my parents I was moving. Not that it mattered. The only thing I had heard from them since the fraud incident was a vague, passive-aggressive voicemail from my mother. "I hope you're happy now. Your father's blood pressure has been through the roof. We'll have to get by without you." I deleted it without responding. The move itself felt surreal, like I was shedding a skin. The drive up the coast was long but strangely peaceful. 700 miles of fresh air and distance between me and everything that used to drag me down. The Portland office was modern, bright, and full of people who knew nothing about my past. Here I wasn't the quiet guy. I was the guy from the retention model who saved the company $1.2 million in Q2. People asked for my opinion. My manager invited me to high-level meetings. I started mentoring new hires. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen. And with that visibility came power. I started a side business, something I had been thinking about for a while. I created a website that helped small businesses automate their delivery logistics using simplified tools I had developed over the years. I didn't expect much, but within 6 months, I had a dozen clients and enough extra income to feel like financial fear had completely lifted from my shoulders. I joined a hiking group, started going to therapy, and took a pottery class, of all things. I wasn't trying to find myself. I was just giving myself permission to be something more than what my family had told me I was. And with every step, my confidence grew, but so did my clarity. The more distance I gained, the more obvious the pattern became. My parents weren't just toxic. They were dependent on controlling the narrative. As long as I was quiet, they could paint themselves as the loving, long-suffering parents who were being mistreated by their ungrateful son. Luke was the success story. I was the failure who had become weird and distant. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't predict, was that I had been documenting everything. Emails, voicemails, bank statements, text messages, all neatly organized in a cloud folder. And with the help of my lawyer, I filed a civil lawsuit for attempted fraud and identity theft. It was a slow process, as legal matters always are, but it was real. And eventually, Luke would be served. But that wasn't even the part one was excited about anymore. No, what I was really waiting for was the moment they would try to pull me back in again, because they would. People like that always do. They would wait until financial strain hit them again. Until Luke's next great business venture failed. Until my father's blood pressure became more than just a weapon in a voicemail. Then they would contact me full of syrupy apologies and desperate charm. And this time, I wouldn't just ignore them. This time, I would respond, but not as the silent son they used to rely on. Not as the fallback plan. I would respond as the man who no longer needed them, who had rebuilt his life from their wreckage and was stronger than they ever expected. And I wouldn't just walk away. I would burn the bridge they had built themselves. But first, I waited. And while I waited, I became stronger. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do, but about who you become. And I was becoming someone they would never recognize or control. And they had no idea what was coming. The opportunity finally presented itself in early spring. Not with a bang, but with a casual email buried in a pile of spam. The subject line read, Miller Family Mortgage. Urgent inquiry. At first, I thought it was junk. I almost deleted it. But then I saw the sender, a junior manager at a small regional bank from my hometown. That got my attention. I opened it, read it twice, and then leaned back in my chair, stunned into silence. The message was brief. It said that a delinquency had been reported on a property I had previously been associated with, and they were reaching out to me because my name had been listed as a prior financial contributor on the account. The address was familiar. My parents' home. The same one I had paid the mortgage on for years. The same one I stopped paying after Thanksgiving. I called the bank directly. The woman who answered, polite but clearly overworked, confirmed what I suspected. The house was in the foreclosure process. No payments had been made in over 4 months. The balance had ballooned with late fees. She asked if I intended to help bring the loan current. I smiled and said, no, but I might be able to help in another way. Because that email wasn't just a warning. It was an opportunity. A tiny crack in the wall they tried to build without me. And behind it, I could see everything starting to crumble. I contacted Marissa the same day. She ran a public records check and confirmed the foreclosure notice had been filed. Even better, the bank had sent several notices, which meant time was running out. The property was set to be auctioned in 60 days. And that's when I understood. They were going to lose the house. The house they had always said would one day go to Luke. The house my mother once called our legacy. The house I kept afloat for years while they treated me like an ATM with no emotional value. And now, they were about to lose it. Unless someone stepped in. Unless someone bought it. That's when the idea started to grow. It began as a flicker, a thought of malice, a quiet, what if? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about revenge anymore. Not entirely. It was about closure, about reclaiming something they had always dangled in front of me as a prize I would never win. And this time, I wouldn't just win it. I would own it. I had the means. Between my new salary and the steady income from my side business, I was in the best financial situation of my life. I contacted a realtor friend in Portland, explained the situation, and asked him to help me discreetly monitor the foreclosure process. He was curious, maybe a little concerned, but he agreed. Then, I went deeper. Rachel, bless her heart, was still in contact. She didn't know the whole story. I didn't want to involve her, but she knew enough to keep me in the loop. One night, she called and told me something that made the whole picture snap into place. So Luke has moved back in with your parents, she said. His business failed. Danielle left him. He's apparently been borrowing money from everyone. Friends, old co-workers, even mom and dad. They're broke, Aaron. I leaned back in my chair, nodding slowly. Are they selling anything? Not yet. But your mom was at church last weekend whispering about needing a miracle. Whatever that means. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. The time had come. I contacted a local investment group that specialized in acquiring distressed properties. I didn't use my name, just a shell LLC I had set up months ago for tax purposes. Marissa helped me with the paperwork. The plan was simple. When the house went up for auction, my group would bid on it discreetly, and when the dust settled, I would be the owner. But that wasn't all. As I was setting everything in motion, another document surfaced, one I had almost forgotten about, a notarized statement I had drafted years ago when I first started helping with a mortgage. It detailed my financial contributions and was signed by my parents, acknowledging that I had covered over $90,000 in payments and repairs as a gesture of goodwill and support. Marissa reviewed it and smiled. If they ever challenge your purchase or try to claim the property was taken unfairly, this will bury them. It wasn't just a receipt. It was protection power, proof that I wasn't some distant son trying to steal the family home. I was the one who had saved it until they betrayed me. Now, I was simply reclaiming what they had squandered. I took the final step. I arranged to fly back home the week before the auction. Not to cause drama, but to be there, to observe, to see with my own eyes the moment they realized their golden child wouldn't be the one to rescue them. Because this time, I wouldn't just be quiet. I wouldn't just walk away. I would walk back in, but on my own terms, and they wouldn't see it coming. The flight back felt unreal. It had been almost a year since I left, since I packed up my life and drove 700 miles north, vowing I would never look back. Now, here I was, sitting by the window of a half-empty plane, watching the city that had outgrown me come back into view. But I wasn't the same man they remembered, and I wasn't coming back to make amends. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. A small event at the courthouse, no pomp, just rows of stiff chairs, a wooden podium, and a bank-appointed auctioneer who read off a list of properties as if he were reading overdue library books. I arrived early, dressed simply. Dark jeans, a button-down shirt, a sport coat, discreet but sharp. I sat in the back, quiet, unnoticed. The bidding started slowly. I waited. When the house came up, number 4131. Willow Bend Lane, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, the same one I had paid for years, the auctioneer barely raised his voice. We'll start at $242,000. Do I have $242? One bidder raised their hand. A woman I didn't recognize, probably an investor. Do I have $245? My agent, whom I sent under the LLC, raised his paddle. Firm. Confident. $245. Thank you. Do I have $250? Another bidder joined in. Then it became a soft back and forth. A few nods, a few counterbids, no drama until it got to $260. That's when the other bidders dropped out. The room went silent again. $260. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was mine. My house. Or at least the house I had paid for. The house they pretended was never mine. The house they said would go to Luke because he would have a family one day. That house now belonged to my LLC and they had no idea. I didn't show up at the house that day. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. Not yet. I wanted the paperwork to process first, the deed transferred, the locks changed, everything sealed up and clean. That took about 9 days. 9 days where I stayed at a quiet hotel on the edge of town, walking the lake, drinking coffee alone in the mornings, sleeping like I hadn't in years. 9 days while the storm brewed in their lives. Rachel texted me on the 7th day. Luke is freaking out. There's a notice taped to the front door. Your mom ripped it down, but she hasn't stopped crying since. They don't know what's going on. They thought they had more time. I didn't reply. On the 10th day, the sheriff served the final notice for them to vacate the house. And that night, I went to the house, not to gloat. Not yet, just to look at it. I parked across the street, engine off, lights low. It was dark, late enough for the neighborhood to be quiet. The porch light was still on. Through the front window, I could see my mother sitting at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped, a mug in her hand as if that could give her strength. Luke was pacing behind her. My father was rigid and silent, looking older than I remembered. I watched them as if they were strangers, and in a way, that's what they were now. They had no idea they were sitting in my house. The next morning, my property manager hand-delivered the final document, a formal notice of ownership and intent to renew the property, effective immediately. Inside was a custom letter, carefully drafted by my lawyer. It read, "This property now has a new owner. All former occupants are to vacate by Friday. There will be no further extensions or exceptions. We recommend securing alternate housing immediately." It was signed by me, not as Aaron, but as the managing partner of the LLC. I wasn't planning on seeing them, but fate, or karma, had other ideas. The next day, I was leaving a downtown bakery when I saw all 3 of them. Mom, Dad, Luke, standing in front of a bank across the street, huddled together like a herd caught in a storm. My mother looked pale and frantic. My father was rubbing his forehead. Luke was on the phone, barking, his face red. I don't know if it was the bank denying them another loan or a rental landlord they were pleading with, but they looked completely adrift. For the first time, they looked like the ones who didn't belong anywhere. I stood across the street. I didn't wave. I didn't approach. But I did make eye contact with my mother. For a long second, she froze when she saw me. Her lips parted as if to say something, but she didn't. She just stared, as if she wasn't sure if I was real or a ghost from a past she never imagined would return with power. I held her gaze, gave her a small nod, then turned and walked away. That night, I got a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize at first, but I knew the tone instantly. "Why are you doing this to us? We're still your family." I didn't respond right away. I let a full day pass. Then I replied, "No, you were my family. And then you showed me what that meant to you. This is my way of listening, finally." They never replied. 2 days later, they were gone. No forwarding address. No goodbyes. The house was empty. And for the first time in years, the weight on my chest was empty too. I walked into the empty house the next week. There was an eerie silence. The kind of silence that clings to the walls after years of noise and memories. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt clean, like the end of something heavy. The kitchen still faintly smelled of cinnamon and old coffee. All the furniture was gone. They took what they could. The table, the cheap artwork from the walls, the old recliner in the living room where my dad used to fall asleep every night. But they left the photos. Faded school portraits of Luke. Graduation photos. A photo from a family Christmas 15 years ago where I was cut in half on one side of the frame. I found a dusty shoebox at the bottom of a closet with my name on it. Inside were childhood drawings, a couple of old report cards, and a crumpled thank you note I had written to my mom in 3rd grade after she made my favorite lunch. She had apparently kept it. Or maybe she just forgot it was there. I didn't take it. I left it in the box because that version of me, the one who yearned for their love, the one who tried to earn a place at the table by paying bills and swallowing insults, didn't live there anymore. I closed the box, and then I locked the door. The news spread. I didn't spread it. I didn't have to. This town ran on whispers, and it didn't take long for people to put the pieces together of what had happened. Rachel told me my mother started saying I had tricked them, that I had stolen the house from them while they were vulnerable. But the truth had receipts, bank notices, court records, a paper trail so long and sharp it cut through every lie they tried to throw out. And best of all, it wasn't just about the house anymore. Luke's fraud case went forward. The forged loan documents, the attempted identity theft, it all took its toll. My lawyer handed everything over to the authorities. The investigation was quiet but thorough. A few months later, I got a message from the county clerk's office. Luke had taken a plea deal, fines, probation, and a permanent mark on his record. Nothing dramatic, it wasn't front-page news, but it would follow him for the rest of his career. The golden child had finally learned what it meant to fall. As for my parents, they moved in with one of my mother's cousins out of state, a small place they shared with another family member. Rachel said they hated it. No privacy, no control, no pedestal to stand on. They tried to contact me one more time. An envelope sent to my new address, handwritten, pleading for reconciliation. I didn't open it. I ran it through the shredder without reading a single word, because forgiveness isn't given away. It's earned, and they never tried to earn it, not once. 6 months later, the house was completely renovated. I didn't move back in. I turned it into a transitional home, a place for young adults aging out of the foster care system who needed a safe start. I partnered with a local nonprofit, created a trust in my grandfather's name, and discreetly started funding it with my growing business income. That house, once a symbol of control, of shame, of what they thought everyone deserved, was now a second chance for someone who never had one. I visited it once, late in the evening, after the new residents had moved in. The porch light was on. Laughter could be heard through the windows. Warm, alive, real. I stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. Then I smiled. Because the house no longer held their legacy. It held mine. And I built it with everything they tried to take away.